The day he finally knelt at his son's grave, he did so with no one left to cast a shadow. The winter sun was a pallid coin slipping between clouds, and the granite stone was slick with a thin sheen of ice, his tears before his tears. Julian Vale had brought white roses, his late wife's favorite for their boy. But there, already trembling in a tremor of wind, lay a small bunch of cheap daisies. And beside them, a waitress in a faded gray coat was sobbing into her hands while a child folded himself into her side like a wing. Before we begin, if this kind of story speaks to your heart, feel free to share where you're watching from. It's always beautiful to see how far stories like this can travel. Enjoy the story. Julian hadn't seen daisies on this grave before. He noticed everything, the soft indentations the florist's wheels left on the gravel when they came twice a week, the single chip on the edge of the stone he'd refused to repair out of some stubborn superstition, the way the winter birds, emboldened, landed on the carved letters of his son's name. Theo, beloved son, friend. The woman's sobs were small and tight, the kind that never asked permission. The child, perhaps 10, maybe older but with a face smoothed by illness, held a paper airplane of a hand, the veins a pale map beneath his tan skin. He was watching the name the way one watches a closed door. Julian straightened, and the motion ached in his knees and his spine and the softest, oldest part of him. He cleared his throat, and the sound was too big. The woman startled. "I'm sorry," she said immediately, wiping at her face with the back of her hand. Her eyes were red and raw, her nose pink from the cold. She stood too quickly and nearly knocked the daisies over. This isn't," she glanced down at the child. "We didn't mean to intrude." "This is my son's grave," Julian said, and the word son slipped out bisected, as if it had gone down a staircase and missed a step. She took his measure then, the coat that cost more than the car she would never own, the kind of shoes you only buy when other people put them on for you. She went still, understanding. Something like shame crossed her face, then pride. She tugged at the boy's knitted hat, pulling it low over his ears. "We know," she said. "We've been coming for a few weeks. Only when there isn't anyone around, I can leave." Julian glanced at the daisies. His voice hardened against its instinct to soften. "Who are you?" "My name is Camilla," she said. "Camilla Reyes. I work at Harbor Diner on 10th, she gestured at the boy. "This is my son, Mateo. We owe him." She looked at the grave the way people look into church pews, the part of their face that belongs to faith lit from inside. "We wanted to say thank you. I didn't expect to find family today. I'm sorry." People owed Julian money. Men owed him favors. Governments once had owed him discretion. He had no practice for being owed for something he had not asked for, a kindness done by someone who no longer had hands to collect it. "Security," Julian said. He didn't raise his voice, but a tall man in a long black coat materialized from the periphery of the cemetery path, his face carved with a professional grief. "Sir," said Ramsay, because a man like Julian never just has security, he has security that knows his weather. Camilla flinched. She stepped in front of her son, a reflex that was older than money and fear combined. "We're not doing anything wrong," she said. "We leave flowers, we sit, we pray." "People come here," Ramsay said, flat. "They take pictures, they sell them." "We're not like that." Her chin lifted, defiant now. "I know who he is, I know who you are, but I knew him too a little." Julian felt a thin line of heat under his carefully layered winter composure. He had been a man rich enough to buy privacy and ruthless enough to demand it. Even grief he handled like a ledger, paged quietly in a study, never out here where the cold could steal it. "Leave us," he told Ramsay. "Sir, leave us." Ramsay melted into the trees like a shadow relieved of duty. Camilla's breath plumed in quick, apologetic bursts. Mateo tugged at her sleeve once, twice. He hadn't spoken yet, but he was watching Julian with a frankness that made Julian feel tall and guilty at the same time, like a man who had not only let a child down, but had done so expensively. "Tell me how you knew him," Julian said, and the words were a surrender left on the wind. Camilla nodded, clasping her fingers together and then unclasping them as if there were a proper sequence she kept failing to remember. "I didn't know him as," she gestured vaguely at Julian's coat, at the air around him that smelled like money and winter. "I knew him as Theo. He came into the diner sometimes, late. He sat at the counter and drank coffee he didn't like. He didn't talk much unless I made him. He left too big a tip the first time." I tried to give it back. He smiled and said, "You can refuse it, but I refused to take it." We argued about that for a week. Julian's mind, slick with disbelief, hit a small snag of recognition. He could hear his son's voice say those exact words, not because he had heard Theo say them, but because he could imagine the cadence, the stubborn grace of it. "He looked tired," Camilla continued. "Like he kept standing up and the world kept trying to sit on him, the kind of tired you get when you're trying to fix something before anyone else notices it's broken." A bitter sound nearly escaped Julian. He pressed it behind his teeth. He knew that tired like a father knows a child's gait in a crowd. He had taught it to Theo without meaning to, by setting him an impossible task, be an heir and a man who belonged to himself. "And your son?" Julian asked quietly, but the question had a rough edge. He was a man who had burrowed through markets and emerged with clean hands. He could not step toward a boy with a knit hat without thinking of things he could not cleanse. Matteo looked up then, and the look reminded Julian of sea glass, something once sharp made soft by time and pressure. "I had a broken heart," he said simply, and pressed a small fist against his chest like a salute. "I mean, my heart didn't work right. It was too big and too tired, and it was nowhere good to live inside me." "Matteo," Camilla murmured, a tender caution. "What?" Julian began, then stopped, because even his questions felt like intrusions here, like stepping past a velvet rope with a badge he no longer believed in. "We were on the transplant list," Camilla said, "for a long time. We live in a one-bedroom on 6th with a view of a brick wall and a laundry line. I work double shifts. His father," she paused, composed herself past the old ache. "We don't say it," Matteo said, as if reading a script they'd agreed to memorize together. "We don't say his name." "We were running out of time," Camilla said, "and I don't mean the kind money can buy. Time. The wind darted across the path and picked up the corner of a paper program left in the grass, a remnant of some other family's grief. Julian put a gloved hand on his son's stone. "And what does that have to do with my son?" he asked, the words that shouldn't have required a bridge needing entire architecture now. Camilla's gaze didn't waver. "Everything," she said. "He saved Matteo. Your son saved him. We came to say thank you." Julian laughed quietly, then violently cut it off because it wasn't laughter, it was a trapped bird. "No," he said, and then softer, "no." "His heart," Matteo said, tapping his chest lightly with his fingers as if playing a strange small instrument. "I have it, and it works. It's strong." He searched for a word that mattered and found one with a child's generosity. "It's kind." The cemetery in that moment was suddenly too full, not of bodies, but of versions of time. Julian stood dizzy in them. Theo at 5 trailing a kite through salt spray. Theo at 17 shutting his bedroom door with the soft anger of a boy told which dreams were acceptable. Theo at 25 with wrists like question marks. Theo at 27 with his face a map of exhaustion and refusal. "That's not possible," Julian said, as much to Matteo as to the whole nod into the day. Camilla pulled an envelope from her bag. It had been folded and unfolded so often it was furred at the edges like a feather. "When both families consent, sometimes they tell you. The hospital sent us this. Your son had written a letter in case." She swallowed around a word that didn't know whether to be gratitude or grief. "In case his organs were used, he left it with his donor card. When we got it, it didn't have names. But then there was another letter from a lawyer, your lawyer." Julian blinked once, twice. He did not remember consenting to a letter. It was the sort of thing he might have refused, because the pain of being thanked would have curdled in him, because he still entertained the delusion that grief could be controlled with policy. Camilla was holding out the envelope with both hands. "I brought it because I thought you should know. We come here because the letter said, well, it said he loved daisies." Julian did remember daisies. He had bought roses after his wife died because they were what she'd carried, not what she'd loved. Daisies had been for summer picnics and the inside of Theo's childhood palms. He took the letter. It was addressed, in Theo's messy left-handed scrawl, to whoever carries my heartbeat. Julian sat down on the cold cement edge of the plot without consulting his bones. "May I?" he asked, a strange courtesy, and Camilla nodded as if she were granting a visa. He unfolded the paper, and the act summoned a ghost of his son, his movement, the way his shoulders dipped and his hair would fall forward, and he'd blow it away with a small, impatient breath. "Dear you," the letter began, and oh, Theo, Julian thought, already fought back by the shape of the words. Even in the first line, you were being precise and wild at once. Dear you, if you're reading this, it means my heart found a home somewhere else. I like that, if I'm honest. It's a better fate than being extinguished like a lamp with no more matches in its drawer. When I signed the donor card, my father said, "You've always been sentimental, Theo," like it was a curse or a disease I'd brought home from a city he didn't authorize. He is wrong about a great many things and right about this. I am sentimental. I like to think parts of us can go on doing what we wanted to do even when we stop. My heart, if you have it, I have failed it in a lot of ways. I taught it to be brave only in private. I taught it to be stingy with hope because hope cost me too much when I gave it to the wrong people. Please forgive it for those lessons. Teach it new ones. Teach it to run without looking over its shoulder for who it has disappointed. Teach it to sing even if no one is listening. Teach it to own a quiet that isn't loneliness. If you ever want to talk to me, go somewhere with daisies. They remind me that not everything beautiful arrives expensive. You don't owe me anything. If you insist on owing someone, owe the life that wants to be lived through you. Do the small, brave thing that the person you were yesterday didn't think you could do yet. T. That's what my friends call me, but you can call me whatever name you have for the heartbeat that isn't just yours now. Julian tried to be the kind of man who folded, but he was the kind of man who broke. He put the letter against his mouth like a mask and breathed through the paper as if it might deliver back air from the room where Theo had written it. I know your face, Camilla said softly. I've seen it on magazines and on buildings and on the trophies men hand each other at those dinners where the dessert looks like it costs a week of my rent. But today, you look like a father. He was a father, a strange, temporary island of a role he had failed at and now couldn't resign from. In this cemetery, everything else was boilerplate. I didn't know he wrote this, he said. I didn't know anything. None of us know, Camilla said, and then we do. They stood there in the cold, the three of them, and something shifted its weight in the day. The old boundaries, the press releases, the gate code, the us of me, bent. Matteo's hat was crooked. Julian reached out and before he could stop himself, adjusted it, his fingers brushing a temple that was warm and alive, blood thrumming beneath the skin like an old, reliable engine. Do you want to hear it? Matteo asked, and at first Julian thought he meant the letter again, as if the boy could speak his son's handwriting. Then he understood. Hear it. Matteo nodded. He took Julian's hand with surprising certainty and placed it flat against his chest, just above the simpleness of his T-shirt, which read Superman was adopted. The wool of Julian's glove caught on the cotton. He removed it, because nothing important should be felt through too many layers. The heartbeat came up into his palm, steady, unafraid, not his. It was not Theo's exact rhythm. It had learned a new cadence inside a new boy. But somewhere amidst the thud and pause there was a familiar hitch, a syncopation Julian had known when Theo used to fall asleep by the ocean, a heartbeat that liked to dance in dreams. I hear him, Julian said, and it was foolish and childish and true. Camilla's eyes shone with surprised kindness. When Matteo first woke up, she said, he kept saying, that's loud, and I said, what is? And he said, hope. The wind eased, a thin sunlight draped itself across the stone. Somewhere in the branches, a bird rehearsed a spring it couldn't yet believe in. Come, Julian said, almost to his own astonishment. At least let me buy you a proper breakfast. I'm better at that than this. Harbor Diner was the kind of place that held winter at the door without being rude about it. Booths with red vinyl seats, a little rip in the corner that had been mended with tape, a chalkboard nailed crookedly above the register offering daily pies. The bell over the door remarked on your presence, and then stopped caring. For men like Julian, places like this were museums of an experience they only rented. For Camilla, it was where the register's drawer, when it slid open, meant rent or didn't. She had wanted to take him somewhere neutral, but Julian, old general of private spaces, had said no here. He and Ramsay took 2 tables by the window that Camilla had pushed together with the ease of someone who did most things one-handed while balancing a tray. She poured coffee for him, for herself hot chocolate for Matteo, whose hands around the mug made the steam look elaborate. Tell me about your boy, Julian said, nodding at Matteo, because he didn't know how to ask about his own without tearing open the day. He likes comics more than he likes math, Camilla said. He tells jokes at the worst possible time and somehow they're always the right ones. He learned to hold still in hospital hallways, and then had to unlearn it out here where moving is how you keep your place in a crowd. He's much older than he should be and much younger than he gets to be. She exhaled. He's here. And you, Julian said. You said you work double shifts. Triple, some weeks. She gave him a smile that had survived too many night buses. I was 19 when I got pregnant. I was 22 when I learned to expect nothing as a practice, not a philosophy. I almost got fired here once for telling a manager his hand didn't have rights my body hadn't given it. Theo came in the next day, sat at the counter, and asked me if I knew the word redress. She laughed into her coffee. He was like that. He had a dictionary under his tongue. I didn't know this, Theo, Julian said. His voice sounded as if it had been left out in the rain. I didn't know yours, Camilla answered. Which is maybe why we both see him like a person and not a project. Julian's phone vibrated, a creep of a thing. He looked down. 3 missed calls from Delia Chong, PR assassin extraordinaire, one from Eric Bates, CFO, a message from the board chat that always read like a parlor game in hell. He ignored them all. He toasted Matteo with his coffee mug, and the boy clinked mugs with exaggerated solemnity. We never imagined meeting you, Camilla said, and it sounded true and not at all like false humility. We didn't want to bother your family. I thought maybe your son, our hearts, maybe he wanted us here so we could share a memory on cold mornings and then go back to our separate, impossible lives. Julian frowned a little. Our hearts, he repeated, feeling the grammar of it press into him. He scrolled his memory back to the day Theo died, and then forward through liquor-smooth obituaries and velvet condolence calls, and a funeral with cameras disguised as lilies. A shareholder had come with a tear like a threat. He had let himself be steered through his grief by professionals. How did he die? Camilla asked carefully. I don't know, only that it was sudden. Julian swallowed. The official story was neat, a car accident on a late night, a misjudged turn, life a candle snuffed by physics. The truth under it was jagged, a call once ignored, a silence that extended like a road into fog. He was driving back from somewhere, Julian said. His phone pinged off a tower near the Children's Heart ward at Mercy. Her hand flew to her mouth. He had been at the hospital. Yes. It hit him like a second death. He had never asked where Theo had been that night. The hospital records, kept private out of respect for donors, might have held his name as a volunteer, a late-night reader to children, a man trying to spend his restless in a room of small stillnesses. I think he was reading to kids. Camilla was silent. She remembered, suddenly, a night she had been working late at the diner, a storm pressing against the windows like a teenager wanting in. Theo had come in soaked, hair plastered to his forehead, eyes lit like a dare. He'd asked if she had any children's books in the lost and found. She had given him a battered copy of Where the Wild Things Are someone had left under a booth. He had smiled like a secret. He brought Matteo comics, she said, on a Tuesday. He sat with him and taught him how to build a paper city. The next week he didn't come. I thought he got bored. I thought, she looked at the table, as if embarrassed to consider that he had other important things to do. It had never occurred to her to imagine the most important thing had been done to him. Julian pressed his knife too hard into the toast, it cracked. I had left him a message earlier that day, he said, about the board. They wanted him to deliver a speech at the foundation gala he didn't believe in. He said he wouldn't come. I said things I said to him often, like a script meant to keep a child in a play he hadn't auditioned for. He looked up sharply. And there is something else you should know. It may not belong in the same breath, but nothing does. Camilla tilted her head. You can tell me. Our company, he stopped, because saying the words remained a betrayal he had never allowed. Vale Industrial. We own a chemical plant north of the city. Years ago, we had a leak. A small one, the kind the lawyers called within tolerable limits, Theo. Julian smiled without humor. Theo called them something else. Camilla's face tightened, interested and wary. We lived near there, she said slowly. In the shadow of those pipes that looked like an airport for a kind of bird that doesn't land around people. They always told us the smell on summer nights was just the wind being busy. Julian felt something sharp reposition in his chest. The data suggested minor impact. He had read those reports like fairy tales that needed proof. In the end, the board believed the findings that cost them the least. My son had a broken heart, Camilla said. We lived near your plant. I can't say those two things touched. I can't say they didn't. I only know the inside of my boy's chest held a problem I don't see in magazine photographs. A silence settled. It wasn't accusatory, but it had edges. The diner continued breathing, fork on plate, a woman laughing too loud into a phone, the cook slipping pancakes onto a warming plate with a small dance. "Why are you telling me this?" Julian asked, hearing how weak he sounded trying to reclaim power like a coat he no longer wore. "Because you asked about my son," she said simply. "And because your son gave mine a second life, and that kind of gift makes the truth sacred." The bell over the door jangled insistently. Delia Chong, in a camel-colored coat and a hurricane of competence, slid into the booth with the entitlement of someone who made herself welcome where the fires were. Ramsay, who had tried to stall her, hovered. "Julian," she said without greeting, "the board has questions and the press has a nose. Who are we dining with?" "No one you can reduce," he said, surprising himself. Delia's eyes moved, assessing, clicking. "Miss Reyes," she said, as if she had already known the name and the life attached to it via the thin pathway of a private investigator. "And this is the boy." Her gaze softened almost imperceptibly. "I'm sorry for your loss, Julian. But I'm also here to protect the company from entanglements." Camilla squared her shoulders. "We're not here for a payout," she said. "We're not here for headlines. We came to say thank you." Delia's smile was quickly kind, even if it had been assembled. "People say thank you." She glanced at Julian. "Other people say, and also, the last thing we need is someone implying the donor's family." "Delia," Julian said. "Promise them anything. And with the plant," "Delia," Julian said again. She stopped. He almost never had to say her name twice. He had always liked her precisely because she knew how to conduct a storm like an orchestra. Today, he found he didn't want music. "Leave us," he said. "But Julian, leave us." Delia's jaw flexed. She stood. She looked at Camilla and the boy with a frankness Julian couldn't be sure was disdain or respect. She left a card by the sugar dispenser anyway, because habits sometimes outrun orders. After she was gone, Mateo took one of the creamers and built a small tower with it. He balanced a sugar packet on top, making a teetering skyscraper. It wobbled. He blew on it gently, and it didn't fall. "I want to fix what I can," Julian said. He was not yet promising anything, but he was stepping toward a new vocabulary. "Start with the plant. We don't get to call it tolerable if it takes years that belong to somebody else, and your rent is not a metaphor. My son gave you something huge that costs nothing. I can give you something small that costs me. It seems like the only mathematics I understand." Camilla watched him. "If I wanted money, I would have found you sooner," she said. Her voice was not unkind. "I don't want to sell my thanks. But I do want something." He waited. She would ask for tuition, a trust fund, a house, a job. He had a machine for producing those things, as well as the paperwork meant to make them feel like gifts and not chains. "I want you to know him," she said, gesturing at the boy. "Not my boy, yours. You can't, not anymore, not like it was, but maybe you can know him through this one." She tapped her son's chest lightly. "People talk about organ donation like it's a transaction, but this feels more like a conversation my boy is having with your boy inside him. Maybe you can listen in sometimes." Julian felt his throat tighten until the world began to narrow into a tunnel, his great wealth a faraway sound like traffic. "Invite me," he said hoarsely, "and I will come." The board did not like the press conference. They liked it less when Julian stood at a plain podium in a plain room and said, in a voice that carried, "We failed to be as careful with our neighbors as we were with our profits. We will be investing a considerable portion of the dividends that would have gone to our shareholders into a fund to assess and address the impact of our plant. We will make our reports public. I will step down as chairman, effective immediately, to focus my efforts on the Vail Foundation, which will be refocused on organ donation and community reparations." Delia's eyes, from the second row, were cool and full. She had not forgiven him for making her job hard. He had not asked her to. Ramsay stood near the door, ready to intercept anger or to escort out anyone who had come to throw forgiveness against the wall and see if it shattered. Reporters asked questions that were soup into which they had thrown knives. Julian answered until he felt hollowed. He almost left the room when a small figure stepped forward. A child, brown knit hat, eyes like sea glass turned toward the light. He was holding daisies. "I'm Mateo," he said into the microphone that had to be lowered twice. My mom says I can talk if I say thank you and if I don't say names, so thank you. My old heart was tired. This new one is busy. Sometimes at night, I feel it running like it's late, and I don't know where it's going, but I think it might be going to the beach. He looked at Julian. If you ever want to go with it, you can come. The room went so quiet you could hear bad decisions being reconsidered. Julian stepped off the stage like a man drunk on gravity. He placed his hand over his own heart, still strictly his own, and bowed a little. I will, he said. After the conference, the internet spun like it always did, weaving threads into garments no one looked good in. People called her a liar. Others called him a manipulator. Someone posted a photograph of Theo who had been laughing and turned it into a weapon, and Camilla cried in the back of the diner into a towel she didn't own, while the cook pretended to drop a fork so he could bend down and put a hand on her ankle. Julian sent her Delia's card with a note. If the world becomes too much noise, we can find a room with no microphones. She wrote back, messy but firm, the diner has plenty of rooms. We will be fine. There were afternoons after that, days of improbable clarity in a city that usually bit. Julian learned the names of Mateo's favorite superheroes and learned that the boy wasn't impressed by money as a trick unless it was used to fix a pothole in front of the school. He sat on cheap bleachers at a youth soccer game and realized that his body was physically incapable of not calculating the cost of what he wore compared to the entire team's jersey budget. He made himself sit there anyway, an old dog learning to sleep somewhere other than the rug of habit. He took Camilla and Mateo to the ocean in winter, when the crowds were gone and the water looked like a cold promise. They scattered daisies into the tide like bright thoughts. He listened to the hush of the waves and thought of the hush of hospital hallways and the hush that had lived in his house after Theo moved out. The sound threaded itself through him. One night late, after the diner had closed and the city had slumped into its 3 a.m. confessional, they sat at a booth by the window and played cards with a deck that had been smudged by 1,000 thumbs. The jukebox hummed a love song that had been a hit when Julian had been the age of the boy across from him. You could sue me, Camilla said suddenly, looking down at her hand. For coming into your life, people sue in stories like this. They sue for a living. I don't want this to be that. He laughed, and it sounded like a sound he hadn't afforded himself in years. I could, he said, sue anyone for anything. I have lawyers who would read me bedtime stories about precedent, but today I am rich with something else, the ability to be present instead of litigious. She put down her cards. I used to think rich people were a different species, like whales. Like you had a language underwater and only sometimes come to the surface to breathe, but maybe you're just people who forgot what it's like to be cold. Whales, he mused. I like that more than dragon. You wanted dragon. I settled for it, he said. Whales are better. The biggest thing and the gentlest. My son would like that. He would tell me what kind of whale I am. Blue, said Mateo with the confidence of someone who had looked up a fact before pronouncing it. Or maybe humpback. They sing. Julian felt Theo's laugh in his mouth, the particular way he would go wide with it, and then look startled by his own joy. He put a hand over his throat as if to keep it from escaping. There is a version of this story where Julian moves Camilla and Mateo into a penthouse where mornings are silent and carpets swallow accidents. There is one where he forgets them, too, as if they were briefly important like an illness you remember intensely while you have it and then refuse to mention. There is one where lawsuits do their work and a check is written and sorrow is abstracted into digits. None of that happened here. What happened is quiet. That's how the big things move. Julian went to the plant. He wore a hard hat and a look that had once made men fall over themselves. Now it made them stand straighter instead. He watched as engineers explained air. He listened as mothers explained nights. He promised less and delivered more, which he had learned was a reversal that made other men suspicious. He went to the cemetery every week with daisies he bought himself. He arranged them with a clumsy care that would have made Theo grin and correct him, a little. Sometimes Camilla and Mateo were there. Sometimes they weren't. When they weren't, he spoke anyway, because he had learned there were conversations you only got to have when no one was listening. He said he was sorry for loving in a way that had felt like breaking. He said he was not sorry to hate there had been a person he could not fix with money. He said please and thank you and I remember when you were small, and pretended to be a whale under the bath's small ocean. Once, in early spring, when the cemetery grass had started to think about its job again, he found a letter tucked beneath the stone. It was addressed in a different hand. "Dear T," it read, "I hope this is not weird. Mom says I should write you when I am scared. Today at school, a boy elbowed me and I fell, and for a second I forgot your heart was mine too, and that it was strong. But then I remembered the thunder sound you and I make together, and I stood up and I pretended I didn't want to cry even though I did. Sometimes I put my hand on my chest and tell you a secret. Today I told you I am learning to run. I am slow, but fast is not the point. The point is moving. You help. Thank you for being busy." Matteo Julian pressed the paper to his face again, an old man making the world smell like paper and not like antiseptic. He thought of how many letters he had written that had never been opened, that had sat in drawers as threatened promises. He thought of the way a boy had solved the problem of a heart with honesty. The last time Julian and Theo spoke was in a voicemail, and Julian had deleted it by accident in a fury of tidying. He had told no one. He had sat on the edge of a bed and tried to shake it out of the air by replaying the rest of the day backward. He had failed. Now he made a new thing. He recorded Matteo's heartbeat once with consent and quietness on his phone. When he couldn't sleep, which had been most nights since the world began losing rather than gaining Theo, he pressed that sound against his ear and let it pace him back into rest. The last time the story leaves them, it is summer. It is the kind of summer city day that smells like hot coins and ice cream melting. The sky is a careless blue. They are at the beach even though it is a weekday and the world is busy pretending it is not full of grief. Camilla has taken a rare day off and is lying on a towel reading a book she can barely focus on. Ramirez has lost his jacket and is standing in the surf in a polo shirt, unbothered. Delia had come and then left, her phone too heavy to hold. Julian and Matteo are at the edge of the water. They have taken off their shoes. The ocean is cold in that honest way water has, not asking you to love it, only to accept it. They are building a city in the sand with a stubbornness Julian recognizes from both boys. Every tower slumps and then is encouraged upright by hands and little murmurs. "Do you miss him?" Matteo asks without inflection, the philosopher present inside the magician he also is. "Yes," Julian says, and the truth is not a sob, just a river. "I miss the person I could have been with him. I miss the version of myself that didn't learn its lessons too late to use." Mom says too late is a story grown-ups tell themselves when they feel tired, Matteo says, gathering wet sand in his palms like mixing batter. "But then they get up anyway and make something for breakfast," Julian laughs. "Your mother is a poet disguised as a waitress." "That's because poets don't get tips. They finish the city. It leans a little. It is perfect because of that. The tide comes in, careful at first, then bolder. It licks the edge of a wall, and then a tower, and then the street between them. They watch as the water erases their effort like a teacher wiping a blackboard. It should feel like loss. It feels like necessary." Julian takes Matteo's hand as the cold water reaches their ankles, calves, knees. The boy's heart beats against their clasped fingers in a tick of pulse at his wrist. It is running, not away. Somewhere toward. They stand there and let the ocean remind them that what is gone can still move through you, that perhaps neither gratitude nor grief ever truly conclude. They ebb, they return, they take a new shape in the air and the body, and you accept them, and you keep building cities with names you can't pronounce yet. On the walk back to their towels, Julian pauses. The daisies on the blanket are slightly wilted from the heat, their white petals curled like hands at rest. He tucks one behind his ear, a ridiculous old man with a flower. Matteo giggles and does the same. Camilla looks up and sees them and smiles into the light, and the picture of it, the three of them without a script, being ridiculous together, burns itself onto the inside of the day. When it is time to leave, they carry their sand bucket and their shoes and the leftover daisies. They will stop at the cemetery on the way home and lay petals on the stone. Someone will take a picture, not to sell, but to keep. Later, much later, when winter returns and the roses are stiff in their grief, Julian will take out that picture and place his finger over the boy's chest and feel, with a certainty that is the only wealth he has left, that he has not been abandoned by love. The billionaire visits his son's grave and finds a waitress crying there with a child. Then he discovers that it's not a scandal waiting to happen or a claim waiting to cash, but a heartbeat waiting to be recognized. He hears it. He learns to show up. And when he places his hand on the small rise of a boy's chest and feels the sturdy thud that once wanted to belong to him and now belongs to all of them, he understands at last that the richest lives are not the ones that buy a future. They are the ones that tend to the past, gently, until it blooms inside someone else.